Mark here for another great Wisdom and Knowledge 5 podcast. And I am just thrilled to bring on the Libertarian candidate who ran for president, Chase Oliver. Thanks so much, Chase. This is such an honor.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on and excited to have a great discussion with you in this podcast. And thanks for having me. And I hope your listeners find this to be, informative and fun.
Exactly. Now, I want to start out by asking, what was it like to run for president? And also, what were some of the issues that voters were telling you were the most important to them?
Well, so to answer the first part of that question, running for president as a libertarian is something that I consider to be like really the greatest honor of my life. I'm not married yet. I don't have kids yet. So I can comfortably say this is probably the greatest journey that I've ever gone down in my life. And it was amazing. I got to travel to all 50 states. I got to meet people all over the country, experience a lot of the country that I just had not previously been able to be privy to, and it was a blessing. Like I can say that, like it was something that was extremely unique, and I was very proud to do it. As far as what were the issues most important to voters? Well, those economic concerns are always the greatest concern to voters. It was very much about kitchen table issues, about cost of living, uh, the cost of education, the cost of healthcare, the cost of childcare, like the cost of groceries. Like that was inflation was probably the biggest number one issue. And then I think domestically, immigration and women's rights to choose, abortion were the two greatest domestic issues. Then, of course, foreign policy wise, we had both the war going on in Gaza as well as the war in Ukraine and the United States' role in both of those wars, really taking up all that foreign policy space. But I wish that we're focused on a little bit more. But most voters are really just concerned about what's going on in their kitchen table and in their neighborhood.
Do you think a lot of voters don't even realize that we were giving billions of dollars to Israel, billions of dollars to Ukraine, and what it's being used for, especially for Israel?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a certain amount of just like because we've been so conditioned since 9/11 to be in this war on terror mindset. I think it's just kind of like now just standard operating procedure in the mind of the voter that we're going to be involved militarily somewhere in the Middle East predominantly, right? And so I think people have just become numb to this. And in reality, we have spent trillions of dollars over the last, 23 years in the war on terror years, including Ukraine, including what we've been spending in Israel, including all the bases we have around the world. And to think about the fact that, if we had just changed our foreign policy objectives, we could have saved trillions of dollars, millions of people being displaced, and hundreds of thousands of lives lost, both in terms of our military and people around the world. So, like, you know, uh, to me, like, it is, I think, something that's tragically not in the forefront of the voter,
Mhm.
most voters. I mean, libertarians, we very much care about that stuff. There is a certain subsect of voters who really are concerned about that, both whether they're anti-war or whether they're the pro-warmonger types like Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio and some of these other folks that we see out of Washington, D.C. They focus on that the most, the Nikki Haley's of the world, right? But the average American voter, unfortunately, doesn't. And I wish they did. And I wish there was a way to get more people into it.
Mhm.
Um, like there was the beginning of the Bush years. Like I remember being part of the anti-war movement in the early 2000s, and there were tens of thousands of people marching through DC and through cities across the country. Like there was a worldwide movement against war. You saw giant anti-war marches in places like London and Berlin and Paris and Rome. Like you saw it all over the world
Mhm.
coalescing against the United States kind of war machine, this kind of empire that we had been building. And sadly, I think a lot of the energy's been extinguished and we need to reignite it.
And when it comes to like things like, well, people that were standing up were people like the pro-Palestinian protesters, or even on the other side, the ones who wanted peace, Israeli, the Jewish that wanted peace, and the media completely spin the narrative on that.
Oh yeah. Well, and to me, I think what we need to be listening to is the Israeli voices within Israel who want peace. Like so many people right
Hmm.
now want to see a ceasefire because there are still hostages, and they know that if a ceasefire happens, they can get those hostages released. And they're begging the Netanyahu government to stop this war, to create a ceasefire, to allow for conditions for the remaining hostages to be released. And Netanyahu ignores this. And now we're even seeing the ICC putting a warrant out for his arrest. And Lindsey Graham again jumping to defend and saying, "Well, we can't let any of our allies have anything to do with that." And the reality is because if Netanyahu were to be held accountable, we'd start eventually being held accountable as a government, and that would be trouble for a lot of people in
Hmm.
Washington D.C. But you're right, the pro-Palestinian movement has been completely quashed. They've been discounted. They've been treated by the Republican Party as like Antifa, these kinds of things. When in reality, these are just young people who want to see peace. And it's sad that we have an incoming government that is extremely hostile to those ideas. So much so that like the incoming ambassador to Israel refuses to even acknowledge Palestinian existence. These kinds of things. I don't think that's going to create conditions for peace in the future. I think that's actually going to create conditions for further conflict. And unfortunate, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I don't see Donald Trump ending this like he says he's going to, you know.
Yeah, I mean, remember Trump promised to end the war in Ukraine before he even took office. He
Hmm.
also promised to put a libertarian in the cabinet. That hasn't happened with any of his cabinet picks. We'll see about freeing Ross Ulbricht on day one. He better do it. If he doesn't free Ross, we riot. That needs to be it's a the moniker. Not seriously,
Hmm.
but we need to be holding him to account. If Ross is not freed, we need to be very shouting that loud and clear. But yeah, if he doesn't wind down this war in a way that's responsible, we need to hold him to account for that because he promised to do that. He said he could do it before January the 20th. I always told people that is a BS expectation coming from a guy
Hmm.
who's running for president. But you know, we should see his foreign policy in that direction. And sadly, the people he's putting in the State Department, the people he's putting in the Defense Department, I see them actually being more keen for more war. Even if they remove themselves from
Hmm.
Ukraine, I see like further action towards Iran and China. And like that's not even a good trade off, right? Like I don't want to trade one war for another war. I want to end wars.
Hmm. And one of the other things is just like the special interest groups like APAC and other special interest groups that are so involved in our politics. What do you think about that?
Well, I was asked this question at the free and equal debate that I did in
Hmm.
Las Vegas in over the summer at Freedom Fest, and Thomas Massey was one of the moderators of that debate. And I pointed to the fact that APAC outspent Thomas Massey, funding his opponents the primary like 2-1 over him, and he still managed to win. And it's because he had created connections within his community. The people knew who he was. He was able to withstand those things. What I think we need to do as a libertarian, I support I do believe money is speech and you should be able to spend it however you want. But what I want to see is all removal of the caps on campaign donations and just let all of it be reported. So every politician can know exactly who's buying and paying for them. So instead of Elon Musk putting tens of millions of dollars in like a super PAC that has no accountability, you don't know really how much money's in there or whatever, do that through a campaign. So you know exactly who is owning your politician because
Hmm.
I think that would actually inform the voter a lot better than the system we have right now with campaign donation limits and then all this shadow money out there in the forms of super PACs and and those kinds of groups. So just make the candidate be accountable for that stuff.
Hmm.
Okay, give them money, and then that way any message that comes out of the campaign. You can't say, "Oh, well, that was a super PAC. They didn't really." I don't coordinate with all that stuff. All those attack ads that they created, I didn't coordinate with that. No, be held accountable for your campaign. Put all the money through your campaign.
Hmm. Yeah, and another thing that, this was such a crucial year for you, Ron, and I really appreciate you, giving people another option because you had other things like the TikTok ban bill, and then when they went to go and speak, the officials and they were grilling the CEO of TikTok, they seemed so not only inhumane, but they seemed moronic. You know what I mean?
Well, that can be attributed to a couple of things. First off, the generational difference in our legislature. Some of these folks, like I doubt many members of the Senate are really on TikTok or
No.
know what it is as a platform, or don't really even understand the social media platforms as they exist. And then the biggest hypocrisy is that they're freaking out over like, oh my God, China might know the data algorithms and the things that you like and like what preferences you have and this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, like Meta takes all that information, X takes
Hmm.
all that information, every major platform, every major social media group, really every company that has a presence online when you accept cookies, like you are allowing for that data to be grabbed, made known, and manufactured and sent off to people and sold. Like that's the agreement you're making a lot of the time. And so the idea that, oh, well, it's a company from China. Well, yeah. I mean, what do you think Chinese people are doing when they're on Meta? They use Meta, and the American owned Meta grabs all those Chinese folks' data and all their algorithmic data. Like, yeah, to me, it seems to me much to do about nothing.
Hmm.
And I think it, again, comes from a lack of understanding. And I think a lot of it also is the fact that it is, something that has allowed for a lot of young people to have a voice in a way that many platforms maybe didn't in the past. And it's upsetting the apple cart a little bit, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle.
Hmm.
And maybe that's why they're so upset about it, because it's really allowing younger, Democrats to have more of a voice as their old establishment politicians kind of fall by the wayside. Speaking of, Joe Biden's got what, 2 months left?
Hmm. Yeah. Now, do you think that that TikTok ban is actually going to, it's already been, the bill's been passed, but do you think it's actually going to go through? They're going to ban it in the U.S.?
I don't know. I think it's definitely going to be challenged in the courts, and in the meantime, it's going to take a few years for that to like uh, litigate itself out. I would say in the end, I hope that TikTok prevails and being allowed to continue to operate. I support a free and open market, and that includes a
Hmm.
social media marketplace. I think if Meta, they tried to create a competitor with Reels. They've tried to do that through their Instagram platform and others. Just like they try to create a competitor to X through Threads, like right. So they're going to continue to see Americans trying to copycat that platform,
Hmm.
and maybe one takes over and improves upon TikTok and is the next big thing. But for me, I don't want to see the government regulating what social media applications individuals can have access to. I mean, that's just a slippery slope towards tyranny and regulation of the internet as a whole.
Hmm. And I've heard you speak before, like back in COVID. I think it was 2021 when they had the vaccine mandates. That you do not support, obviously, the government run vaccine mandates, but you do support, businesses being able to have the choice to, mandate the vaccine for its employees. But the question I want to ask you is, if the government wouldn't have tried a vaccine mandate, do you think a lot of these businesses would have not done mandates?
Well, it's kind of hard to speak in hindsight, of what
Hmm.
may or may not have occurred. I think there probably would have been less so, because I think ultimately some of these firms lost good employees who didn't want to get vaccinated. And they did so under threat of the government, right? We'll never know exactly how the market would have behaved without the threat of violence that comes from government via OSHA and other organizations that were trying to
Hmm.
push mandates out. We'll never really know. What we can know now is that if such a thing like a pandemic were to ever happen again, to not support these things, to say that they were ineffective, to say the least. They were challenged and thrown out by the courts, like they were shown to be unconstitutional. And now we have precedent for that. And we have a court system that can allow for to say, no, precedent
Hmm.
law says that this OSHA mandate was ridiculous. And so hopefully in the future we'll never have such a thing ever happening again because people will be aware. But I think, yeah, there probably would have been less people doing so. I think there would have been less mandating of that. And again, the reason why I support this is in accordance to property rights. People have a right to make stupid business decisions. They have a right to do stupid things with their property and their business. And they have a right to lose out on good employees because they make bad decisions as a company, whether that's a vaccine mandate, whether that's a dress code at work that like people just don't want to abide by. Like I've seen businesses that have very strict business dress codes, and guess what they lose out on? Some of the best IT workers who want to go to work wearing a t-shirt and jeans and who do a way better job than some of the people who are forced to wear polos or button downs, right? Like
Hmm.
but that's a decision a business makes. And it's up to them to decide what the values of their business are and exactly what their returns are. And
Hmm.
as a libertarian, I feel like the government should stay out of that as much as possible, even when they make decisions that I would personally disagree with. If I were in a position of power, I'd have to say, hey, I might personally disagree with that, but I'm not going to wield the force of government to make that decision for people. And so, yeah, I mean, and it's one reason why I oppose government mandates. There's an idea that, what is it? Good ideas don't require force. If you're having to use force to put that on people, there's probably a very good chance that there's some unintended consequences that come from
Hmm. And when it comes to things like the lockdowns, I know you were against that and you knew that that was a mess. But one thing that I did is they had, I don't know if you were aware of these, they had these worldwide freedom rallies across the world. Well, in the US, the ones that I went to, they were Trump rallies. They were all Trump rallies. One of them in 2021, people were having Trump Kennedy flags. It's like, so it was so obvious when Kennedy joined him. It wasn't about humanity. It wasn't standing against lockdowns. It was all about worshiping Trump. It was just like ridiculous. Where other
it. Which is,
countries,
yeah, that's crazy considering he's the guy who started this whole thing
I know.
and gave Fauci a commendation on the way out. Like this is one of my greatest things. Like I received criticism running for president because there were pictures of me wearing a mask. And I mentioned that like I tried to in the summer of 2020 practice some social distancing from people and adjusting to working from home, these kinds of things. And I was roundly criticized.
Hmm.
But meanwhile, the candidate who installed all of that stuff, who allowed the public health tyranny to occur to begin with, who gave the initial vaccine liability, who created Operation Warp Speed, who took the vaccine and told people to take it, who also wore a mask, and then in the intervening years never apologized for it, never really went back on it. Still to this day, like he just a few weeks ago tweeted truthed, he didn't tweet, he truthed, I guess, about how, it was coming up on the 5 year anniversary and what a great job his government did with Operation Warp Speed. So he still has not learned from those mistakes. And yet, many libertarians criticized me and voted for him, which I
Hmm.
I don't hold a grudge against people. Like I don't hold a grudge. Like I don't care if you didn't vote for me. Like I have close friends of mine who are Republicans and who are Democrats who I know absolutely probably went and pulled the lever for Trump or for Harris. And like I don't hate them for it. I'm going to spend some time with them over the holidays. I'm sure these friends, right? But what I can say is for libertarians, I question a certain level of like, hypocrisy to say, oh, I'm going to back the guy who did all this and gave Fauci a commendation on the way out. But
Hmm.
Chase wearing a mask one time is like just too much. And like, I get it that you're backing the team that won, right? But if he hadn't won, like, would the gamble have worked? Like, I just don't, for me. And so yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling on a little bit, but to me, like, yeah, this is all goes back to bodily autonomy, medical freedom, and the need to not have government enforce every single thing at the barrel of a gun, which is ultimately what government does when they pass a mandate or some sort of requirement for people.
No, you're right on point with that. And he said just every you're right. It was right under his, it happened under his watch, and then they always want to say, "Oh, well, he didn't mandate it. He didn't do this. He promoted it left and right. He knew, a lot. He got booed at his rallies, a lot for doing that."
Yeah, I mean, and I think, and if he had won re-election, do we not think that he would have maybe passed vaccine mandates?
Hmm.
Because he would have been under the same public health team. He would have had no accountability. He would have just continued doing what he'd already been doing, which to me, like, that is worrisome considering we're about to have him coming back into office. I worry we're going to have trillions more in debt. We're going to go right back to the foreign policy of drone bombing, which, love or hate Joe Biden, drone bombing has decreased over the last 4 years compared to what it was under Donald Trump, compared to what it was, I think, even under Barack Obama. And so, like, that's actually a sign of the good direction. I fear we're about to reverse course there. And there's a lot of other things I fear we're about to like either amp up or just continue along that we've been doing for my entire adult life. And some people see Trump as this great agent of change, but when you're surrounded by people like Marco Rubio and Susie Wiles and some of these other people, like to me, it's just the same old kind of GOP establishment.
Hmm.
Uh, and what does he care? He's only president for 4 more years. He wanted to be elected president again, so he can be vindicated. Which now he feels vindicated, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. That really, really changes things in the direction of liberty. I am not super optimistic, but we'll see. I look forward to being proven wrong.
Hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. And there's other things too. There was a lot of issues. Why don't you say that neither candidate, touched upon? Like, there's a lot of people who are just humanitarians who stand against things like, the World Economic Forum when Klaus Schwab comes out and says you will own nothing and you'll be happy, or Agenda 2030, which they're ramping up, and they're not talking about either of these.
Yeah, well, I think the reason because of that is that the establishment of both major parties are really involved in a lot of the kind of
Hmm.
the involving ourselves in world affairs kind of a thing. Those entangling alliances that George Washington, even in our founding, warned us against, right? And so that's why you're not going to see any actionable, really rhetoric towards those things from those who are in power, because that's kind of as designed, right? What I think we need to focus ourselves on is reaching out to what voters care about,
Hmm.
and being able to communicate our values through them, and really growing organically. Like this is why I don't believe in trying to infiltrate the Republican or Democratic Party. Because ultimately, if you're a libertarian and you jump into the Republican Party, you don't make them more libertarian. You will get more Republican, or you'll get completely ignored and discounted and eventually primaried out, which is what they do. I mean, even look at Ron Paul. Ron Paul, folks would argue is the most important liberty voice that's been in the Republican Party really ever, right? Libertarian voice. And he was roundly discounted. I mean, think about the fact that in what is it? It was either 2008 or 2012, which I think it was 2008 when Giuliani was running,
Hmm.
and they had a debate. And Ron Paul was talking about the blowback that's caused by our worldwide empire and the military industrial complex. And he was roundly booed in the room, except for by his supporters. His supporters did cheer for him, but a lot of the room didn't. And then Rudy Giuliani jumped right on him and basically called him a terrorist sympathizer. Who has a
Hmm.
closer ear? Now, I know Ron Paul is advising Doge, but Rudy Giuliani is Trump's personal attorney, or was. He has a
Hmm.
way closer ear. The people who feel like Rudy Giuliani did in 2008 have closer relationships to Donald Trump than the Ron Paul wing of the Republican
Hmm.
Party. And why? It's because those people have continued to be discounted. Folks like Justin Amash, even Thomas Massey, when he spoke out against Donald Trump, he was called a loser by Trump. He was discounted by him. And so for me, I just don't see a path forward for libertarians to really change the Republican Party. It's calcified, just like the Democratic Party is calcified. They're old and they need to be broken down, and they need to have real competition built up. That's what I'm focusing on, is making the Libertarian Party a vehicle that can challenge them. So
Hmm.
I think that's a better path forward. It's a longer path. It's probably a more difficult path than trying to push our principles into that party. Um, but it's a more needed path, and I'm willing to take it.
Hmm. And when you ran in Georgia, you got enough votes to force a runoff.
Yeah, in 2022. And this is why I think having runoffs and ranked choice voting is important. Just look at the differences between my vote totals in 2022 and 2024 running for president. It was a lot smaller votes. And the reason being, there is no runoff in the presidential election in Georgia. There is no second round of voting, so to speak. We had ranked choice voting. There's a good chance that we would have had a higher vote total in each state, especially if we could have advertised, put the Libertarian as your first choice to signify that you don't like the other two, right? Um, it's why we need to continue to fight for those kinds of reforms, because even a runoff is better than plurality voting. And I think it's better for third parties. And we saw that demonstrated between 2022 and 2024. So I'm going to continue to also fight for those kinds of reforms that we need in states across the country. We need every state to have a voting system like Maine or Alaska that allows
Hmm.
for ranked choice voting.
And how many states you were on? 47 states, right? On the ballot on
47 states,
47 states.
47 state ballots. Uh, did not make the ballot in Tennessee, Illinois, New York, or Washington, D.C., but I was a certified write in candidate in all of those. So there are
Hmm.
some votes that got counted. You just had to learn how to spell Chase Oliver and Mike Termont.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, one of the things I'm sure you were aware of is that RFK's name was still on many ballots. I mean, from what I heard, they fought to. I know he wasn't on in North Carolina here where I am. They fought to get him off the ballot, from what I heard.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I think there was a difficulty for alternative parties to really get a lot of oxygen, is because RFK took up a lot of that oxygen both throughout the first part of the campaign cycle up till Labor Day, right when he dropped out right before Labor Day. But even afterwards, his name was still on the ballot. So many people who had already kind of committed and then tuned out were like, "Oh, RFK is running. I'll vote for him." And then just like, I don't have to pay attention to anything else.
Mhm.
Still walked in the ballot, the voting booth and cast a ballot. It took a lot of the oxygen out of the room, and
Mhm.
particularly, I think a lot of that came from the libertarian sphere. Um, and there were other headwinds internally in the Libertarian Party that I think our campaign faced. But by and by, I just want to put out some results because I have it written right here. So I have gotten in terms of raw votes, I am the fourth most successful candidate and fifth most successful campaign out of 14, because Johnson ran twice and got the first and second highest vote totals, right? Um, but of all of those candidates, including folks like Ron Paul in 1988, Peru and Brown and Bednarik and former Congressman Barr, right? We outperformed them and did so with under about a $500,000. Like let's round it around, $500,000. In real dollars, we did more vote per person, like vote per dollar, than any libertarian campaign has ever done. Had we had more resources, had we had, a party that I think was structurally more able to support a presidential campaign, which I don't think we had in 2024, which we did have in 2020, 2016, and 2012, which led to our record vote totals in those cycles. I think we could have done much better. And so now I'm committing myself to building the party. So whoever runs again has that better chance to have more resources and succeed.
Yeah. Do you think what is the pathway to getting a third party candidate in the regular debates, or do you think this will never happen because the media doesn't want it? Both the Republicans and the Democrats don't want it because the American people have spoken. If you take a poll, they want to hear another voice in these debates. They're sick of this.
Yeah, I think there's two paths. First off, luckily the Commission on Presidential Debates has ended, so it's no longer this quasi governmental agency that sounds official, but is really just Republicans and Democrats gaming the system. Uh, Republicans and Democrats this time around, they went and directly negotiated with the news agencies. What we're seeing is a breakdown of traditional media sphere where it's no longer just about ABC, NBC, CNN, Fox News. We're actually seeing much more alternative media growing, and that's organic. I don't think that has to do with one campaign or the other. I think that's just organic to our culture. And so I'm hoping in the next election cycle we can challenge the mainline parties that if they don't participate, there will be large platforms that will be platforming libertarians and Greens and others. The free and equal debate do their best to try to like get us out to as many homes as possible. Let's see a growth of that model and see more and more alternative parties being able to have a place on a stage that even if the Democrats or Republicans aren't allowing us, we're creating a stage for ourselves. And of course, inviting them to participate that gets plenty of viewership. The other alternative to that is to make enough noise and get enough commotion going to where the mainline news networks just really can't ignore you. Kind of the
Mhm.
Ross Perot method, which is viable if we have a party structure that can grow and have the donor network and activist network and support structures across the country to really facilitate that. And again, that's what I'm committed to doing over the long haul. It's not just in the next 4 years, it's over the next, decades that we have to continue to build this year over year over year, cycle after cycle.
Mhm. Now, for those who want you want this type of change, or what is their route? Just humanitarians, not people who are running. What is their route? They're not going to listen if people protest. They're not going to do a thing. Is there anything that individuals can do to say, "Hey, we want by the masses, we support an alternative party"?
Yeah, well, of course, you can start organizing within our parties.
Hmm.
Like if you believe the Libertarian Party philosophy is for you, I encourage you to join it. I encourage you to help elect ethical and professional leadership that has a track record of building something. Whether it's a business or a nonprofit or something, let's put people in place inner party that can help grow the structure. Because once you do that, once you can show performance increasing, you can have more resources to put activists on the ground to help lead those on the ground activist efforts, things like marches and protests that do need to have strength behind them, rallies. but they have to be organic. They can't be astroturfed. That's the thing. The Republicans and Democrats, they can afford to astroturf.
Mhm.
We can't afford that. We have to be organic with our grassroots support. And then, I think one thing that folks can do is be active in their local government. Like go to your local government meetings and have a voice. Say I agree with this or I disagree with this, and here's why. And if and I encourage you, if you ever do this, and you remember the Libertarian Party, say at the end of your speech, by the way, I'm with the Libertarian Party, and if you'd like to hear more about us, I encourage you to check me out. I'll be in the back of the room. I'd love to meet anybody who thinks that what I just said is a good idea, and encourage people to grow your voice that way. But be involved in your local government. Like know what's going on in your neighborhood. That's the first step to like gaining a little bit more focus about what's happening in your community. And once you do that, you can actually organize active change at like city council level, alderman level, these things. And once you get your foot in the door, that way you can really start to grow yourself organically. And that's one of the other things I think the Libertarian Party needs to commit itself to. We had 400 candidates in this last election cycle, and I commend each and every one of them. I thank every one of them for running, right? They did something that is very hard to do. I've done it many times now. I can tell you the challenges. We need to make our party functioning to where we can truly support, not just have 400 people running, but truly support 800 people running in 4 years from now. That's my goal.
Mhm. Now you're someone who didn't, go to college, and you are big on the, get your work experience in colleges. You're not against college, of course, but you're saying that get experience out in the work field, and that's another thing that's so great about you.
Yeah, I mean, I support. There's a lot of educational alternatives. I just want people to be critical thinkers and lifelong learners. You don't have to get a 4-year degree in college to do that. In fact, there's a lot of avenues to success and a way to live very comfortably and have a great life that don't involve that. Now, sometimes you do need to go to a university, and for that, I want to make paths that make it college more affordable or free market incentives we can do to actually lower the cost of higher education. But there's also apprenticeships. There's work programs that can allow you to like grow within a business, and of course, there's just getting right out there in the workforce, which is what I did. And each of those, there's a path to live comfortably and to have a great life. It does not just require a 4-year degree in college. Not that, and I'm not knocking people who get in. There are plenty of great people who have degrees. I just happen to not have one, and a lot of the country doesn't. A lot of this country is the working class, and I think it's important for us in politics, for folks that have my lived experience to have a little bit more of a microphone, as opposed to kind of the elitism that we see out of both parties. I mean, how many Yale degrees are there? Like, how many Ivy League degrees are there in Trump's incoming administration, as opposed to people who even just maybe went to a state college, right? Like,
Mhm.
there's just a whole level of difference, and we need to really let the working class speak a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. And when it comes to things like regulation of food and stuff, and like some of the states, like even North Carolina, I think you can sell it to pets, but like raw milk is banned. But like this, regulation of not knowing if your ingredients have GMOs on it or whatever, you're someone who believes that people should know what they have in their food, and you don't want the government regulating our food system, right?
Yeah, no one government regulating what goes into the food. I think they do a terrible job of trying to do it right now. I think there's
Hmm.
actually better ways to, display food safety and efficacy, food safety and these kinds of things than relying on government programs. But I do support labeling. I do support knowing what is on the, in the package. Like I do think it got, I do think that a responsible person puts that kind of stuff out there. And I think it's important for consumers to know exactly what they're buying. And I think that's how we can move ourselves in a direction towards healthier and better foods is by knowing what's in there and educating ourselves. I agree with a lot of what RFK Jr. says about health, food, and safety. I think where we're going to disagree is that I believe if he, gets the HHS nomination, he's going to use the regulatory power of government to force these decisions to be made by consumers and not allowing the market to make those decisions.
Hmm.
When what we really need to do is create incentives. Like corn syrup is a great example. Corn syrup is very bad. It's way less healthy for you than cane sugar. But instead of trying to just regulate corn syrup, just remove the corn subsidies that we have that make corn artificially cheap and then remove the tariffs on cane sugar that make sugar artificially expensive. Like remove those mechanisms, and guess what the marketplace will do? Create more products with cane sugar because consumers want it. They will prefer it. But we have to create the conditions to where it's economically viable.
Hmm.
And that's what the free market will provide.
Yeah. And I mean, you see people, I don't know if you've heard of this, but like there was even that boycott at Kellogg's. They went to the Kellogg's Corporation, and Kellogg's really didn't care because some of the Kellogg's ingredients, I'm not saying that Kellogg's is healthy food by any means, but some of the ingredients in other countries are made with healthier ingredients in these food dyes and high fructose corn syrup, and they really don't care.
Yeah. And I think that what we need to do is remove all subsidies for big agro business, food businesses, just remove the subsidies altogether and flatten out the cost of the corporate tax rate so we can have more competitors coming on board. So we can have new cereal manufacturers who are more focused
Mhm.
on healthy food eating, who can provide the Fruit Loops that don't have all the harsh chemical dyes and let them compete openly in the marketplace. Like this is what we need to create is a condition to where those who are putting bad food out there can be competed against by people who want to put good food out there. But right now, we're creating barriers to entry into the marketplace. We're really focusing on supporting the giant agro businesses as opposed to family farms. And same thing with food manufacturers. We support the giant food producers, the giant food distributors, as opposed to allowing conditions to allow competitors to come up. And this creates artificial monopoly that's basically backed by government action, backed by government regulation, and it's disruptive. It's disrupting the invisible hand. And it's putting a very visible government hand into the marketplace. And so, as a libertarian, I think the solutions are rooted in changing the conditions of the economy and the way we interact, not just regulating what's good and what's bad. Because ultimately, when you give that power to a government, another government with a different
Mhm.
set of priorities gets put in there, and all of a sudden they have the power to regulate all sorts of behavior. If you give RFK the power to regulate what you can eat right now, you're giving a future Democratic administration to regulate what kind of medical decisions and what kind of body decisions you can make, or a future Republican administration. So, like, I don't know. I want to remove those structures of power. That's the big picture. That's what libertarianism is about.
Hmm. Exactly. And we saw in Trump's first term that he did not drain the swamp whatsoever. You don't see him accomplishing what he claims he's going to accomplish, do you?
Yeah, I feel like, first off, I don't feel like we were made a promise by
Hmm.
Donald Trump that he was going to put a libertarian in a cabinet position and libertarians in senior leadership posts. So far as for the cabinet picks, we're not seeing a libertarian. RFK does not count. RFK can align with us on some things. Sure, he bought a lifetime membership, and this is an excuse being used by the national chair to put out an email saying, "See, we got our libertarian, you guys." If he had put Bill Weld in his administration, who's also a lifetime
Hmm.
member, I doubt the National Party would be sharing an email going, "See, guys, we got our libertarian in there." To me that doesn't really count. It doesn't cut the mustard, and I think a lot of folks are being upset about that. And I'm seeing him putting loyalists in, neocons. His surgeon general pick said that the COVID vaccine was a gift from God, right? Like
Hmm.
there's definitely a non-libertarian wing of the Trump administration that seems to be taking most of these senior posts, and it's unfortunate. But and I'm not going to say I told you so because I think that's unproductive. But what I can say is now that you're seeing it, folks who thought that he was going to be kind of bringing this libertarianism into the White House, it's time to organize for something better. Join us and let's
Yeah,
organize and change our priorities.
I'm with you 100%. And do you ever see, like, because in our time, the divide and conquer game is like no other, between Democrats and Republicans. Do you ever see humanity going? I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, it wasn't this bad, that's for sure. Do you ever see things changing where, everyone can just get along?
I don't know. There's always going to be division of some kind or another, but you're right.
Mhm.
We're really hyper polarized at this moment. But what I would remind people is that just because government is hyper polarizing itself doesn't mean we should be against each other. And in fact, there's a lot of things to look at over the last like 50 years that are really point to a better world and can make us optimistic. Like, look at the fact that extreme poverty has been, cut in half thanks to capitalism and free markets, right? Look at those kinds of markers to say that the world is doing better in many cases. Like look at violent crime. Like you were way more likely to be mugged at gunpoint, walking down the streets when I was born in 1985 than you are today,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's just a fact. Now there's outlying things that are bad, and a lot of that comes from government. It's why we need to be vigilant. It's why we need to organize. It's why we need to have a voice and speak out against the wrongs that are being done. But on the whole, I think we can improve ourselves. I think there's an optimistic future ahead. And so, while it may seem dark sometimes, and you're right, the polarization and the politicization and just the fighting each other that we see between Democrats and Republicans has gotten so much more sharp. Do I think that fever breaks? I hope so. And I'm optimistic that it will as we build up alternative structures to challenge them. Because when it's no longer one on one,
Mm-hmm.
when there's third and fourth and fifth voices involved, it creates the conditions for coalition building, and that's a better way than hyper partisan polarization.
Mm-hmm. And it just seems like, people are just way too, not everyone, because there's a lot of people who are not, whether they be not political at all, or they just don't like either, party or the whole system to begin with. But so many people who are tied to, identity politics, they're just obsessed with it.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of what we see is people being conditioned right
Mm-hmm.
into conditioned into being a two-party voter, conditioned into these false ideas about people like that dehumanize people, that put them into collective corners as opposed to looking at people as individuals and seeing nuance in the world. And I think that is, again, that's a symptom of this polarization, right? When everything is black or white, you're with us, you're against us, you lose all those nuances of gray. And that allows people to be collectivized and to put into corners and to put into, uh, you know, into just this false binary that exists within politics. And that's dangerous. I think it's wrong, and it discounts the voices and the stories and the impact that so many people have in the world by just discounting it into you're either with us, you're against us, kind of a mindset. For instance, like I ran against Kamala Harris, I ran against Donald Trump. I think neither of them were the best choice for president. Obviously, I wouldn't have run for president otherwise. But I think there's going to be, hopefully something good comes out of the next 4 years. I can't be optimistic, lack optimism and say nothing good will happen over the next 4 years. I hope something good comes out of it. Just as there have been, a couple of good things that happened the last 4 years. We're not in the war in Afghanistan anymore. Like as somebody who got his start protesting that war and the war in Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good thing. We need more of that. If you were to put that on like a scale of the good to the bad, I don't think it would outweigh the bad things that have happened under Biden.
Mm-hmm.
But let's keep in mind that there's going to be some good things that happen in the future, and not try to just be all doom and gloom and divide
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and be so hyper partisan. And it's poisonous. It's just poisonous to good discourse.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think is going to happen with like over in Israel? Do you think it obviously it seems like it's ramping up and there's no end in sight. Do you think something is going to change there, or it's just going to be more of the same? Because when it comes to something like, Netanyahu and Israel, so to speak, they seem to be, getting away with just about everything when it comes to, especially when in America, at least, you know.
Yeah, I am very worried about that region of the world. I would be regardless of if Harris or Trump
Hmm.
had won, because there's not really any meaningful. I think Trump's ramping it up, like with like his pick for ambassador and his pick
Hmm.
for
Oh yeah.
some of these foreign policy positions. Um, and to me, I worry for the people of the region that there's going to be further strife, further division, further displacement, further violence. And I really worry about if Iran feels tipped to get engaged, because if that happens, that's really where the world war is going to start. Everybody's looking at Ukraine and Russia.
Hmm.
The truth is if we ignite a war with Iran, we're going to see other players jumping in, and it can very quickly escalate. And that's where I really worry about the flashpoint coming from. I hope that the people of Israel and the people of the Palestinian territories can um, reject their own governments reject the governments that they have that are doing this violence, whether it's Hamas or whether it is the Netanyahu government, and
Hmm.
replace it with individuals and who really want to see peace and hopefully, and I still think the two-state solution is the most viable. But whatever it is, I want to see conditions of peace, and I just don't think that the Trump administration incoming is going to contribute to that, sadly enough.
No, I agree with you 100%, especially when he's aligned with people like Mike Huckabee, who doesn't think, Palestine should exist. Or look at what Rudy Giuliani said, which was just completely, BS and inhumane when he said, got up there in New York City and said, Palestinians are taught to kill Americans at age 3.
Yeah, and then when you hear other rhetoric from people within the Trump administration, whether it's Marco Rubio and the things he said, I recall RFK saying that the Palestinians were the most pampered people in the world.
Hmm.
These kinds of comments, and it just makes you worried about the fact that we're going to have an administration that's going to fully back Israel uh, and keep destabilizing the region. This is not, and for me, this is really bad for the people of Israel who are going to have to live under
Hmm.
this high tension and the possibility of war because they don't deserve it either. Like many of these people just want to live their lives in peace, and they are avid critics of the Netanyahu government. We need to be listening to those people too.
Yeah. Now, when you see, like, I know on TikTok, because the media is not showing it, but they've shown protests in Tel Aviv where people want peace. Those are actual protests for the peace to end the war, don't you think?
Yeah, they want ceasefire. They want to see the
Hmm.
hostages released. They want to see conditions that will allow the remaining hostages to come home and to defuse tensions so that they don't have to live in constant fear of war breaking
Hmm.
out in a major way against the people of Israel. Because that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing all of the Palestinian territories being, particularly Gaza, but all of the Palestinian territories are having major problems, and we're seeing a million people displaced in Lebanon. We're seeing, a lot of these tensions increasing, and for me, it's bad. And that is one area where I'm not super optimistic because I do worry about the people Trump is putting in place that will be dealing with that directly, and I worry that we're not going to see a ceasefire anytime soon.
No, just who he's aligned with, and just I don't believe, what he's saying. I'm sorry, I'm not attacking supporters or people who, stand by him, but I just don't buy into what he's saying.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. We have January 20th will be right around the corner, then we have 4 years to see how it goes. So right now all we can do is guess, but and pray for the best.
Now, you met recently with one of the Argentinian parliament members. What do you like What do you like best about Argentina's government?
Yeah, well, so I got to meet him. We were both at the Liberty International World Conference in the
Hmm.
Dallas Fort Worth area. So I got to meet him. It was great talking to him, and he seems very enthusiastic about his nation, right? That they're actually on a growth trajectory. What I like most about this is the economic side of things. Like there's definite differences of opinion I have with probably with Javier Milei on some cultural things or some foreign policy. But what I really like about his government is that he recognized that they are in crisis mode and that they have to do these things. And he didn't lie to people. He said there's going to be disruption. There's going to be some pain that happens from this, but what we're doing is we're resetting the bone so that way it can heal properly, right? And I think in doing so, he has made very quick change in a way that our system just does not allow for. I think there's definite differences between the Argentinian system of government, and the American system of government, and so we can't truly replicate the Argentinian model the same way that Malay did. But I think there's a lot of lessons we can take on how to drastically reduce the size of the state, which is something we're going to have to do sooner than later because otherwise we're going to be in a real monetary collapse that's not going to be pretty.
Hmm. And you're also someone who does not support these tariffs, whether it be, tariffs with China. You name it. Discuss
No,
that.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
anti-tariff, pro-trade. It's because maybe I worked in the world of maritime logistics and I saw exactly how interconnected the marketplaces are around the world and how vital trade is between nations. But I just think we need to tear down those barriers as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to immigration, your policies are much different than both parties.
Absolutely, because I see the value in each and every individual, and that their labor is capital. Capital should be able to move freely across borders, to be able to be utilized to the best of its ability. That's what a free market is about, and that includes human capital, the ability for you to create a business and start and run a business. And I think we should facilitate the ability to allow people who want to come here to work to do so as easily as possible through a 21st century Ellis Island. Like, let people who want to come here to work come here to work. Quick background check, good to go. Come on in with
Mm-hmm.
documentation. This would prevent the labor exploitation. This would prevent the driving down of wages. This would allow communities to come out of the shadows and not fear deportation, which sadly is going to be probably increasing over the next few years. And it will allow us to have a free and open marketplace for the jobs that need to be filled, and ultimately for the population we need to replace our aging population.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think about things? This is on the lines of immigration. Mayor Eric Adams said he's going to work with Trump to, I think, deport those the migrants that came there. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, ultimately, I don't think deportation works. I think it's too expensive. It's going to lead to a huge violation of civil liberties for millions of people, immigrant and non-immigrant alike, both
Hmm.
legal and illegal immigrants alike. I think a better path forward is to figure out a way to streamline the process of people who want to come in and allow the people who are in here some sort of documented status. And of course, if you commit a crime while you're here as an immigrant on a visa or on a worker status, yeah, you get deported. Like, that shouldn't be controversial. But most immigrants aren't criminals. And so if you only go after the criminals, which is what so many Republicans seem to think is about to happen, oh, they're only going to get rid of the criminals. In fact, many Latinos voted for Trump who have
Hmm.
family who are undocumented immigrants because they were told, oh, well, he's only going to go after the criminals. How do you parse out that? And how do you commit the greatest mass deportation of all time by only going after the criminals? Because not all immigrants are. In fact, statistics show that immigrants, both documented and undocumented alike, commit less crime on average than the average American. So, like, just getting rid of the criminals, we'll still have millions of people here who need some sort of documented status to be able to work here and bring their community out of the shadows.
Hmm.
So, I find the mass deportation program that they are proposing to be completely untenable, too expensive, and just impractical. And we'll watch it fall apart in real time over the next 4 years. But sadly, many people's lives will be interrupted, and human rights will be invaded because of it.
Hmm. And with your stance on that, this is another reason why people need another choice because there is a massive amount of, Americans who would resonate with what you're saying over any other, party or any other system.
Yeah, well, and I think that's why we need to adopt things like the Voter Bill of Rights. That if we could get that passed, in states across the country, we would actually open up the process to more people. It is important to do that because, again, getting back to the false binary and this division that we have, when you put an honest third or fourth or fifth voice into the process, that breaks that up and really gets the ability to get work going through coalition building and through collaboration, which is just something we just don't see. And
Mhm.
I think it would be better, and we could ultimately move the Overton window towards liberty if those were the conditions. But so long as we have just a two-party system, they're going to continue to ignore the libertarians.
Mhm. And there's with both parties, you've seen so many, broken promises, so to speak, lies, whether it be things like student loan forgiveness, which I know that you're against that. It never happened. What is your solution to something like that?
So when I was running, I had a plan to basically uh, get the government out of the business of student loans because right now there's an artificial floor that's created when government backs all of these student loans. And that's what they do for over 90% of them. So what I wanted to do was make all currently government backed student loans interest free So that way, people who were currently on the government backed loans could pay down their principal and get off of the government balance sheet. And you would also pair that with not adding any new government backed loans. And so this would transition ourselves back to a more free market system where banks are loaning out money based on the worth of the degree. And this would require colleges to lower the cost of many of their programs. They've artificially inflated the tuition cost of because they know the government's backing the loan. And so this would put market practices back into higher education, ultimately lowering tuitions and allowing over 90% of students who are currently sitting with a loan that's government backed the ability to just pay down the principal. And yes, government would lose revenue by not getting those interest payments. And you fix that by cutting the Pentagon to account for that lost revenue. So that way you're making this revenue neutral. You're not adding to the debt and deficit.
Hmm. No, seems like a, great solution. Now, where do you see yourself in the future? Would you ever run for president again, or what do you see in the future?
Well, in the next 4 years, I'm going to be focusing myself on building and professionalizing the Libertarian Party to make sure it's the strongest Libertarian Party it can be going forward in future election cycles. Whether I run again in 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, I got lots of time. I'm 39. If I ran in 12 years, I would still be younger than Kamala Harris was in this election cycle. Right? And so I have plenty of time to think about running again, which I'll absolutely consider, but only if we can build out the Libertarian Party to be a stronger party structure than it
Hmm.
was in 2024, so it can better support not just a presidential campaign, but candidates all up and down the ballot all over the nation.
Yeah. And one thing we do see, not only with the two-party system with the politics, but you see people, tuning out celebrities, athletes, you name it, because they don't resonate with the everyday person.
Yeah, well, and maybe that's why we need to have more regular average Joes like myself running for office to be representing their common, the average person's concerns and needs. I feel like I was probably the only presidential candidate in this race who really feels the pinch at the grocery store when they're going to buy groceries. And I think we need to have people with that mindset running for office across the country so that way the government can be really held accountable.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And so for the future, you would potentially run again. And like you said, are you the youngest libertarian candidate that ever ran?
I am the youngest candidate for president as a libertarian who's ever run. And Um, I look forward to many years of being an elder statesman in my 40s.
Hmm. No, well, hopefully, things will change and there will be a way to, get massive, get ballot status on every state and to get, out there. I know that the media, sure seems to be bought and sold and, it's not representing the people. And hopefully your voice will be able to get out there or whoever, whoever's it may be that resonates with the people.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see what kind of change we can make in the future. Like I said, I'm an optimist, so I think the world will improve. But we got to put the work in to do it.
Hmm. And I think it is encouraging when people, have a voice themselves and they speak out, whether it be on platforms like TikTok, whether it be on podcasts, you name it. And there people are spending more. I think there are a lot of people out there who are spending more time wisely than, they used to be engaged in, watching TV or doing this or that or watching sports. And they're out, being a voice for peace, for love, for humanity, for freedom, you name it.
There's time for both. I am wearing a
Hmm.
Tennessee hoodie right now,
Oh
but
no, I know. Yeah, I'm
you know, what
with
I'm
you.
saying there's time for sports and there's time for things, but no.
Mm-hmm.
But being serious, I'm glad more people are paying attention to what's going on. It's the
Mm-hmm.
decentralization of information that is a good thing. That's one of the greatest miracles the internet has ever provided to us. And so, yeah, let's go forward in the future to fight for more freedom, fight for more humanity, and treating each other with a little bit more respect. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Chase. This was such an incredible interview. If people want to, find out more about you, where would they go?
Well, the campaign website is still up, votechaseoliver.com.
Hmm.
And in fact, if folks want to donate there to help retire a little bit of the layover debt that we have as a campaign, it would be greatly appreciated. And then you can follow me on all social media platforms at Chase for Liberty.
Hmm.
And stay tuned for what the next vehicle looks like that I'm going to be involved in. We have some plans in the works, several irons in the fire. So stay tuned to those social media platforms to see what I announce next.
Well, for Wisdom and Knowledge 5, that was Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate for president. It was such an honor to talk to you and discuss what is going on in the world. Keep standing up for humanity, for freedom, for human rights.